Coming to you from an undisclosed location, somewhere deep in the heart of the Santa Monica Mountains, I'm your intrepid host, L.A. Marzulli. I have a very special guest today, Derek Gilbert. We go back years and more years, and it's always great to see him, always great to talk about what he's into. We'll be talking about his upcoming trip to Israel and some of the sites, megalithic sites that he's going to be exploring. So I think he has room. We'll find that out. First, a word from our very trusted sponsor.
Gold has gone mainstream. You're seeing it everywhere, and prices keep climbing. Every day, more and more Americans are catching on to the power of gold. But how do you actually take advantage of it? How do you invest in a way that's safe, simple, and built for the long run? That's where Noble Gold Investments comes in. Noble Gold specialists are trained to help investors like you go from confused to confident, from wondering what's next to knowing exactly what to do. Whether you're looking to roll over an old 401k into a gold IRA, or you want physical coins and bars delivered right to your home, Noble Gold makes the process simple, safe, and stress-free. You'll get step-by-step guidance, transparent pricing, and U.S.-based service from a team that's handled over $2.5 billion in precious metal transactions. With Noble Gold Investments, protecting and growing your wealth isn't just their job, it's their commitment. Visit noblegoldinvestments.com today to claim your free wealth protection kit. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Noble Gold, helping you build a stronger future. Folks, Peggy and I invested in it several years ago. It has gone through the roof, and I don't think it's going to stop yet. Remember, folks, there's always a risk with any type of financial investment. Take a look at what Noble Gold has to offer. Peggy and I did it several years ago. I'm really glad we did. It's hovering right around 4,000. Who knows where this thing's going to go? So, noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com.
Hey, folks, thanks for coming here. We do a show every single day, so don't wait for the algorithm to send you an invite. We do a show every day here. And if you haven't subscribed, thank you for doing that, and consider becoming a member. Anyway, Derek, thanks so much for coming on the record. You and I go back, I don't know, 12, 15 years, something like that. It's been a while.
Yeah, I think when we look back through our app at the archives, it's probably a little longer than that, but it is always an honor to talk with you, because as I'm not ashamed to say, it was your book, the Nephilim, which was of course a novel that really got me excited about hey, this is in the Bible, and so let's start digging into this and studying this, and that has led to I've lost count of number of books. There are at least 9 or 10 in the last 8 years, and there's always something new that comes out, and we Sharon and I, with our book, The Gates of Hell, wrote about the geography of Jesus' ministry and where he was baptized and why it's not down near Jericho where everybody thinks it was, in fact, a declaration of war in the land of Bashan. And the book I'm working on now is about how this whole supernatural war that we're seeing play out in the headlines. I mean, as we're recording this, things happening that are related to the supernatural war for control of the Holy Land.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, you just can't. And it's all there. And yet the mainstream media won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Anything supernatural is too woo-woo. And I understand that. But, you're a supernaturalist. I'm a frank supernaturalist. And so we're always looking for, what's really going on here behind the scenes. But you're going to Israel. And I mean, I just, I don't want to go to Israel right now for the obvious reasons, but tell us about the tour and where you'll be headed, please.
Well, we're leaving on October 19th, and so we'll really kick off the tour on the 20th of October, 2025. Of course, we were there last spring when things were really hot in Gaza. I mean, we looked down into Gaza from a hill at the city of Sderot. There's an overlook, and we could hear the Israeli artillery as they were beginning the operation at Rafah, which is the border crossing between Gaza and Egypt. Things have cooled down considerably since last May, but having said that, just as we're recording this today, the IDF had issued alerts for the city of Ashdod, which is just north of Ashkelon, which borders on the Gaza Strip, because Hamas launched 5 projectiles toward Ashdod, and then a couple of others in what they call the Gaza envelope, which is the area just to the east of the Gaza Strip, which is where we were last May. We visited the site of the Nova Music Festival, and we will be going back there. We're going back to see the Nova Music Festival site. We'll visit some of the communities that were attacked, like Be'eri and Ofakim and Sderot, where the police station was overrun during that awful morning of October 7th, 2023, just to show people that this supernatural war that we talk about and that we've been talking about, that you've been talking about for decades now, Sharon and I, not quite as long. We're a little, coming late to the party, but trying to catch up, that there are physical consequences that are being played out in real time right before us. And that's why when we go back beginning October 19th, we want to take people to some of these sites, but we'll also go to the other sites that go back 6,000 years and more to the pre-biblical era to show how this is how the supernatural and the natural connect. That's really what this tour is going to be about.
It's bizarre that this little chunk of land, all the stuff, Mount Hermon, the fallen angels coming down, the whole pre-flood thing, and then it plays out with the Nephilim. And isn't it interesting how Gaza was never conquered by Joshua and Caleb? They let it go.
Right.
It's like right there in our Bibles. It's right there. Tell us some of the megalithic sites that you're going to be visiting. That's fascinating.
Well, one that I know that you've been to, and our good friend Mando Gonzalez has been to, Gilgal Rephaim, or Wheel of the Giants on the Golan Heights. We had the opportunity, Sharon and me, and then Doug and Janelle Van Dorn, back in 2023. We spent a day there with archaeologist Dr. Mike Freakman, who's done the most recent excavations there.
I read his paper, right.
Yeah, and he's hilarious because he looks like a biker. He's a Russian Jew, so he speaks with the Russian accent, and we tell him, he's explaining something to us inside the central core of Gilgal Rephaim, and no, we read your papers about this. You're the ones. Now I must kill you. And he's got a Fu Manchu mustache, and but just to give you an idea how this war has affected Israel, he's been called up twice now for reserve duty, and he's been deployed into Gaza. So you've got an archaeologist who is more than 10 years past peak fighting age.
Yeah.
Who is now, and he's not alone. 10% of Israel has been deployed in this. But Gilgal Rephaim, as he explains, is related to the cult of the dead. He showed us the serpent mound of Bashan and the structures there, including what appear to be dwellings occupied by the priests who tended to Gilgal Rephaim. He's kind of unique in dating the megalithic structures on the Golan Heights. Most Israeli archaeologists will put those structures in the Bronze Age. Dr. Freakman did something which I thought was brilliant and made just all kinds of logical sense. He looked at the location of ancient dwellings, where they could identify villages in the various periods of history, late Bronze, Middle Bronze, Early Bronze, Chalcolithic, or the Copper Age. And he found that in the early and Middle Bronze Ages, there weren't enough dwellings near Gilgal Rephaim, and most of these megalithic structures called dolmens, which look like giant tables made of stone, for them to be constructed. There just wasn't the workforce close enough for a guy to, walk with his little lunch bucket from his home to the site of the construction and then walk back home again at night. But there was during the Copper Age, the Chalcolithic. So based on that and a process called optically stimulated luminescence, or OSL, he was able to date Gilgal Rephaim to about 3710 BC. That's about 1,200 years older than the estimate for Stonehenge and for the Great Pyramid of Giza, which means there was an organized civilization on the Golan Heights, ancient Bashan, the place of the serpent, 1,200 years to almost 2,000 years before anybody thought there were enough people there to do this kind of thing. So we'll be going there.
Wow.
If we have time, and I hope we do, we'll go to the Serpent Mound again and show people up there the structures on the back of that Serpent Ridge. There are more than 140 megalithic burial sites up there on the back of this serpent-shaped ridge that makes the Great Serpent Mound in Ohio look like
child's play.
Yeah, yeah. It's like 3/4 of a mile long, so it's like 3 times longer. It's 20 feet high and 200 feet wide. It's huge. And he found that many of these megalithic sites or structures on the back, which look like giant piles of rock or tumuli, as scholars would call them, when you section into them, they're structured exactly like Gilgal Rephaim, concentric rings of stone around a central core. This echoes this design that is seen at ancient sites around the world of a central dot with rings around it, which, in his view, he argued suggests a portal from this realm to the next. So that's one of the sites we'll be visiting, but we're going to go a couple of new places we've not been. One of them is the Shamir Dolman Field. This is named for the kibbutz. The Dolman Field is just outside the Shamir kibbutz. And among the 400 dolmens in this field is one with a capstone that they estimate, that's the tabletop, if you will, they estimate it at 50 tons.
And
That's like 2 fully loaded 18-wheelers on an American highway. How did they get that up there?
wow. How did they quarry it? How did they move it from point A to point B and then lift this thing? It's just like, what are we looking at here?
Exactly. What I found most interesting is this. The archaeologist who did the survey of the Golan Heights and the Jordan River Valley, or the Hula Valley, which is the valley through which the Jordan River flows from Mount Hermon down to the Sea of Galilee, is surrounded by about 1,100 dolmens on the hillsides looking down into this valley. And according to the archaeologist who did this survey of these locations, they said this Shamir Dolmen Field was the center of the dolmen building culture of the ancient Levant. So you go to that location, you see this massive structure, and there's another one with a capstone that looks pretty big. In fact, Doug Van Dorn and I thought we'd found it, and then our good friend Aaron Lipkin says, no, come over here. This is the one. And it's like, oh yeah, this is even bigger.
Wow.
It looks down into this valley. Now, when you look at Scripture, Matthew chapter 4 in particular, which records Jesus moving to the city of Capernaum, which is where the Jordan empties into the Sea of Galilee. He wrote that this was to fulfill the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 9. Those dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. Those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. Now, is it possible that that Jordan River Valley is the valley of the shadow of death? Remember what it says.
That's really interesting.
In Psalm 23,
Yeah.
Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Again, these dolmens, in fact, the word dolmen comes from a Celtic language, Brittonic, that means table.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to show people this dolmen and suggest that what you are looking at as you look down into this beautiful valley that looks like an agricultural section of the American Midwest, this could be the valley of the shadow of death, because it's mentioned in Canaanite myths as the place where Baal was killed by the death god Mot and then eventually brought back to life. It is there's another epic poem from the Canaanite, is called the Epic of Akkad, where a young man is killed because he refuses to give the war goddess his magic bow. And the father says, I will mourn for him. I will search for him. And when I find him, I will mourn for him. And I will bury him at a tomb for the underworld gods. Well, that's a phrase that the Canaanites used to refer to the Rephaim, the spirits of the Nephilim, the mighty men who were of old. Mm-hmm. When he finally finds his son, he says, I will mourn for him and bury him at a tomb at Kinneret, which is the Sea of Galilee. So we're seeing all these geographic clues that point to this region between the Sea of Galilee and Mount Hermon as supernaturally charged, which again, getting back to our book, The Gates of Hell, which is why we argue Jesus declared his divinity at the foot of Mount Hermon, Caesarea Philippi, the gates of hell, but he was also baptized in that area very close to Capernaum, north of the Sea of Galilee, because it's part of that region. It was a declaration of war against the Rephaim, against these spirits, the demonic spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood. And of course, we'll go to Capernaum, we'll go out in the Sea of Galilee, because now you've got this really brings whole new meaning to Jesus walking on the water,
Yeah, yeah.
because the sea represents primordial chaos. But there's an Israeli archaeologist who suggests that the Canaanite myths that locate the threshing floor, the abode of their father god El, the two deeps of El, or the source of the two deeps, as being at or under the Sea of Galilee. And I argue in my book, The Second Coming of Saturn, Saturn is Kronos, who is El of the Canaanites, who is Molech
Right.
of the Hebrews, who is Dagon of the Philistines, who of course was the chief deity of the people who lived in the Gaza Strip. So it all connects.
Yeah, it's mind blowing, really. It really is. And you're such the level. I love the way you present it in a very accessible and yet very scholarly way. Let me ask you something. We know that Israel has taken the southern part of Syria. Is that close? Now, I haven't looked at a map, but is it close to those very large cities that were there? You know what I'm talking about here.
Right. There was a book called The Giant Cities of Bashan. Yeah.
Did they annex that, or don't you know?
They're holding it as a buffer zone.
Right.
The Golan Heights extends well into the Syrian side of the territory. In fact, the kingdom of Og was the two battles that Moses and the Israelites fought against Og of Bashan were on the Syrian side of the border. The cities of Ashtaroth, which had been identified as a ruin. Edrei is the modern city of Deraa, which is on the border between Syria and Jordan on the Yarmouk River. So again, we know where those are, and they're on the Syrian side of the border. So all of that belonged to ancient Bashan, was taken and given to the eastern half of the tribe of Manasseh.
Right.
When the Israelites settled the land. So yeah, they could be holding that. And of course, they also captured the summit of Mount Hermon when the government of Bashar al-Assad fell, and Israel is holding the summit of Mount Hermon. So yeah, Israel's got control of many of those supernaturally charged sites. I don't know how many of them are aware of or have the same kind of worldview that you and I do, but I imagine there are a few who do.
Yeah. What's interesting is Mount Hermon was not controlled by the Jews, by the Israelis, for a couple thousand years. And all of a sudden, here we are. And, for me, it's hugely prophetic. It's like, oh my gosh, this is where as Chuck Missler used to say, all the mischief started. Mount Hermon, this is book of prophets, we all come down. And now you can access the little temple, which was on the Syrian side, where I think they found that stele there.
Yes.
So and Doug Hamp did a sort of went back and looked at the translation, which was very interesting too. Hats off to Doug. But I wonder if that's accessible, because if it would, just to be able to go there and see that.
Yeah. I imagine because the military is holding it as an observation post into Syria, probably not.
Probably.
But yeah, it would be fascinating to see, especially to get up to the summit, because the summit, according to Sir Charles Warren, had been scooped out to receive drink offerings. Yeah. And this drink offering, in fact, in ancient Hebrew was referred to as Yared, which is the same word as Jared or Jordan. So there was a scholar named Edward Lipinski who argued that the days of Jared, referred to in the book of First Enoch, when the Watchers came down, didn't actually mean the days of the patriarch Jared. It meant during the days where that drink offering was poured out in the summit of Mount Hermon. Interestingly, when Warren found that stela, he also found a low stone wall that forced people who were going up to the summit to perform this ritual had to take it counterclockwise.
Wow.
And Warren in 1869 connected that to the counterclockwise, what do they call it? Circumambulation, the counterclockwise march of the Muslims around the Kaaba in Mecca, because they believe that there are stones from 5 sacred mountains in the Kaaba, one from the Mount of Olives, one from Jebel al-Nur, where Muhammad got his alleged revelation, the Mountain of Ararat, and Mount Carmel, and the other was Mount Hermon. So, yeah, it's interesting that this ritual of circumambulating may begin on Mount Hermon. And bringing it back to Gilgal Rephaim, We actually discussed this with Dr. Freakman at Gilgal Rephaim. His mentor, his archaeologist mentor, Dr. Yossi Garfinkel, wrote a book about 15 years ago on ritual dance in the ancient world.
Wow.
He said that in the ancient Near East, and I cited this in The Gates of Hell, that 80 to 85% in the ancient Near East, which included ancient Israel, of the depictions of humans were of humans dancing. And they were dancing almost always in profile like this, dancing counterclockwise. Dr. Freakman argues that that was the purpose of Gilgal Rephaim, that the sections, the spokes, if you will, in Gilgal Rephaim were added later by Bedouins who were trying to use that structure to keep their goats and their sheep in place. But back in the day, it was used for ritual, dance, for speaking to, communicating with, hearing from the ancestors, which of course were actually the demonic spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood. So once again, it all connects, and it may all go back to Mount Hermon, which on a clear day, as you know, is visible from Gilgal Rephaim.
Unbelievable. Interestingly enough, in Peru and all throughout the Southwest and really pretty much everywhere, you see these spirals. And I've talked to Chief Joseph about this and other First Nation people, if the spiral goes clockwise, they're telling you it's a good place to be. But when the spiral goes counterclockwise, don't go there. And interestingly enough, the TV show which people are watching about that little supernatural place out there, counterclockwise spirals. And we see this, clockwise and counterclockwise. So just really interesting that, all this counterclockwise movement of people opens up gateways, opens up portals. It's just
right. And again, it may all go back to Mount Hermon.
Yeah.
And as Sir Charles Warren found, that wall leading up to the summit of Mount Hermon forced you to approach counterclockwise.
Wow. That's really profound. So let's switch a little bit. On September 23rd, Rosh Hashanah, 24th, that whole, a lot of people were looking for the rapture. We covered that. We talked about it. It's like, my hand's on the plow. Am I expectant? Heck yeah. Especially with where we are. Could happen at any moment. We don't know. In the meantime, we have work to do, right? And so that's what we're doing. But what I find interesting is during that period of time, the 23rd and the 24th, the UK and France and Canada and Australia basically called for a Palestinian state. Now that's, in my opinion, that's prophecy being fulfilled, maybe not in toto, but certainly to the point where those of us who are looking at the biblical prophetic narrative, looking at this, and that's like a huge line in the sand. The whole world almost has turned against Israel. What are your thoughts on this?
Oh, absolutely. We've seen it since October 7th of 2023. The world sympathized with Israel as long as the fresh images of destruction on the Israeli side of the border were being broadcast. Once the images shifted to what was happening on the Gaza side, then the world began to turn against Israel. And now we're seeing Christians who are declaring that Israel is the bad guy in all of this. Hamas is getting what it wants out of this, which is why Hamas is dragging out this conflict. Again, as we were recording this today, the Israeli Defense Forces have control of more than half of Gaza City and most of the rest of the Gaza Strip. And yet they're still firing projectiles into Israel. They're not laying down their weapons. They're not returning the hostages. In fact, they declared that they would move the hostages above ground to put them in harm's way. They are dragging this out because the more the world sees images of suffering coming from the people of Gaza, the more the pressure builds on Israel to put an end to this. Now, I know there are some who said that Benjamin Netanyahu did this for political gain, that he needs this to preserve himself. I think that's a fundamental misreading of Israeli politics. Netanyahu will probably historically be blamed for what happened on October 7th. And I know that there are theories that there was the stand down order that
right.
Our friends in Israel, Israelis who are connected both politically and in the military, conservative, religious, Orthodox Jews, they tell us, first of all, the Israeli society, 60% conservative, most of them support Netanyahu. 20% Arab, 20% socialist. The socialists make up the bulk of the deep state in Israel, and Israel's deep state hates Netanyahu the way ours hates Donald Trump. The deep state there controls the judiciary, which is out of control because they don't have a constitution in Israel to rein in the power of the judiciary, the Supreme Court. It can overrule any law passed by the Knesset just by saying it's unreasonable. You don't need to be a legal scholar to understand that that is a loophole big enough to drive a tanker truck through.
And then,
Secondly, the IDF is controlled by the socialists. We are told by those who know, people who live there, that you don't get to the upper level of the IDF or the IAF if you're not a socialist. They don't trust Netanyahu. He is not deep state. He is an outsider. He was educated in the United States, which to the Israeli deep state makes him an outsider. They believe one of two things is true. Either the IDF was overconfident in the use of technology to surveil the border. It didn't think that Hamas had the technical know-how to compensate for the use of these passive devices to keep an eye on the border. They were overconfident in their belief that Hamas was deterred, that Hamas was too intimidated by the power of the IDF to dare attack, or they just didn't tell Netanyahu what they knew, because we do know
right.
from a report that was issued several months ago that the Israeli Defense Intelligence was aware that Hamas was doing things on the unusual things, planning, drilling on their side of the border. They concluded, now they're just doing it for show, just to keep the people of Gaza happy. See what we're doing. We're going to stand up to those Israelis someday. They think, our friends that is, that they perhaps did not share this with Netanyahu because they didn't want him to do something foolish like send the military into Gaza. The way our Pentagon admits that after Trump's first term, they admitted, we didn't tell him things we didn't want him to know. We told him we were pulling out of Syria, but we didn't. We didn't tell him, that we were slipping information to the Chinese so that they wouldn't think Trump was going to go to war. So our friends are telling us either one or more of those things is true. Netanyahu didn't let it happen. It was not a false flag. Netanyahu does not gain anything politically by letting this drag on because, as I said, 10% of Israelis, the population has been called up, which means you've got families that are separated, men and women who can't go to their regular jobs because they've been called up into the reserves, crops that can't get planted or harvested, which is why you've got ministries over here that are asking people to volunteer to go over there and pick fruit off trees and stuff. Wow. The longer this goes on, the more it tears up the Israeli economy and Israeli society. Netanyahu politically would benefit by ending this today rather than trying to put an end to Hamas. But Hamas they are religious fanatics. They live Islam the way Muhammad lived it in the 7th century. If you do not crush Hamas, if any semblance of that organization survives, it will emerge from their tunnels like cockroaches coming into the sunlight, declare victory, and they'll wind up in control not just of Gaza, but of Judea and Samaria as well.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Let me stop you right there, folks. We're going to go over to members only. At this point, I'm going to be talking and asking Derek about the Ezekiel 38 war. As the late Chuck Russell used to say, there's not an Arab in the bunch. So it's very interesting. And we see, in my opinion, Derek and I might differ on this time-wise, but something is brewing and it's not going away. Thanks so much for watching. Consider becoming a member. And we'll be at the Prophecy Watchers Conference coming up October 8th. Not sure when this is going to air. Probably this week. ProphecyWatchers.com. Sign up for the live streaming. I'll be speaking twice. Once on the Shroud of Turin. I think you'll find that interesting. And then, of course, the Giza Pyramid. What lies beneath? Dark Secrets of the Nephilim. I think you'll find it interesting. Anyway, we'll see you again tomorrow with another show.